So
Absolutely.
I'm sorry that we don't have Arnaud Ente himself with us. I did try. I went to see him to taste the 2021s, and he's a shy sort of person, doesn't really speak a lot of English either. I suggested maybe his son Pierre, but who's joined him the last 4 or 5 years, and Arnaud said no, Pierre's even more shy than I am. So I'm afraid we haven't got the vigneron, but I was able to talk back sort of across his career and get a few more insights rather than just what I know from tasting the wines. And that's one of the reasons why I thought today we would taste the wines from oldest to youngest, and then we can see how his path has changed. So I'll go back a little bit earlier before where we're going to start tasting, because he came to Burgundy to see his grandfather. His father is from the north of France, nothing really to do with wine, but at some point married a girl from Puligny, Montrachet, whose father owned vineyards, a chap called Camille David, who I don't think he bottled them himself. And in 1991, Arnaud married a girl called Marie-Odile Thévenot. So most of the vineyards that they have are from the Thévenot family. And Marie-Odile's, I'm not sure if it's her brother or her cousin, Jacques Thévenot, used to be a sharecropper for Domaine des Comtes-Plafond. So everything, as always in Burgundy, it ties in some family way or other. Now I've organised for you to have a little map of Meursault, since most of Arnaud's vines are within the village. And if you look at the bottom of the map, you'll see the hospital, l'Hôpital de Meursault, which is where sort of the traffic lights are on the main road. And if you go directly up the map from there, the first little grey building standing on its own on the right would be Domaine Costurie. If you went up further up that road till you start to get to vineyards, at the top on the right, just before you come to another crossroads, is Domaine Guy Rouleau. And if you just go on the left-hand side of the road, you'll see Ente l'Ormeau. In fact, there are the two plots on the left-hand side of that road leading up are a vineyard called Ente l'Ormeau, and Ormeau is an elm tree. And that is where the majority of the Arnaud Ente Meursault village vines come from. He's got 1.6 hectares there in two plots in the bit that's slightly higher up. So there is a difference. The lower ground is that much sort of deeper soil and slightly less interesting terroir. So he has christened his plot Clos des Ambres. It's just a title that appealed to him. It doesn't have any official significance. And within that, there's some very old vines, which I'll talk about when we get to the wine, called Seve du Clos. And sort of the sap of the Clos, that would translate as. Again, that's his own name, which has no official designation. So the first three wines and most of the second flight will come from this Ormeau vineyard in one form or other. He does make a basic Meursault, which is a mixture of this Ormeau vineyard plus also a little bit of Casse-Tête, younger vines that he rents from the village of Meursault itself. And then he's got the Pulignys. But before we start tasting the wines, I'll sort of talk you through his timeline, and in particular, as I know it, because there was a grower who I used to work with then and went on, continued to work with all the way through, called Jean-Philippe Fichet, who at that point lived more or less next door to Arnaud Ente. And one year when I was tasting Jean-Philippe's wines, probably the 94 vintage, he said to me, well, I'm perfectly happy with my wines, but you should go and taste Arnaud Ente's. They're amazing. They're much better than anything I do. So it's pretty rare to hear a grower saying something like that. So I got his number and went across to see him. I've been sort of before email days, and was able to snag some of the 95s, and I went on working with him until I retired from commercial business. Now, the wines he made in the 1990s, below his father-in-law's house, were much richer and riper than they are today. That was the style which he initially liked. The 96s actually got a tiny bit overripe. And he was thinking all the time as he was going along making these wines, he was thinking about what he really liked, what he wanted to do. his hero, and I think he did an internship there as well, a stage, with Jean-François Costerie. So he'd be much more in the Costerie style of winemaking than a Lafon style. And as time went by, he thought, I don't really like rather rich wines. So I'm going to try and make something a different style. And 2000 is the absolute turnaround vintage here, when it moved from being picked late to picked really very early. And since then, he's become almost the poster boy, the byword for particularly early picking. I'll come on to that a little bit later, because for me, you can choose to pick early, you can choose to pick late, but either way round, it depends on how you've run your vineyard, whether or not you've got your grapes ripe. And my view is, and you will discover as we taste the wines, my view is he does manage to get his grapes ripe even a little bit before other people do. So then, having made this change, particularly in this more fine mineral, precisely chiseled style, he was finding that the effect of the barrel was rather impinging on the purity of the style that he wants to make. So from 2004 onwards, he stopped using normal 228-litre barrels, and he started buying bigger wood, 400 or 500-litre barrels, or the demi-muises, as they're called, which are normally 600-litre, and he's still got some of those. Even then, there's a little bit of a wood effect, but it was less marked. And he stopped aging the wood for 2 winters in barrel, so they'd spend the first year in this bigger wood, and then they would go to tank after that. So the wines are becoming more and more precise, and when we get to 2009, he changed his label. He had a perfectly nice but relatively standard label, and I don't know if Sebastian can put a bottle on the table, but you'll see with the 2009, I think that's the first vintage when he moves to this, I think, beautifully designed label, which has got a picture of sort of a bow and arrow to show the sort of the pinpoint precision of what he's doing. Anyway, that bottle will be put out for you. And your first 2 wines to taste are 2009 Clos des Ambres and Seve du Clos. Now, of course, it's true that 2009 is one of the richer vintages, so it'll be interesting to see exactly how this shows. So Clos des Ambres is from vines which were planted in 1950 and 51 in the En Ormeau vineyard. But when he took over the vines, there was a little patch of a couple of rows which were clearly very, very much older. And when his father-in-law, Philippe Thévenot, had bought the vineyards in the 1950s, already he thought then that the vines were probably 70 years old. So that means that we're going back into sort of the maybe late 1870s, early 1880s. So they would have been the first vines replanted immediately after the phylloxera scourge. And so now they could be 140 years old. And this is extraordinary. These must be just about the oldest vines in Burgundy. And what's quite fun is if you visualize a vineyard, many of you will have visited the vines in Burgundy, and you'll know that they're planted 1 meter apart within the rows, and each row is a meter apart. So you get this quite dense plantation. And a vine sort of sticks its arm out. You use the single guyot, so you've got the main plant, which is, as it were, me, and then it's got one branch stretching out like that. Now, in these very old vines, obviously a lot have died over the years, and rather than doing what most people would do, which would be just to make a hole in the ground and plant a new one where the dead one was, instead, they've just extended my arm, they've extended the branch as far as they can, and it's sort of, in fact, they've extended it on both sides if necessary, with a few stones underneath to hold these now quite old branches up. It's really extraordinary. And effectively, this vineyard is in the grounds of the very good restaurant, which I recommend to you. It's got a super wine list, which it was called Auprès du Clocher when it was in Pommard. And the chef, who's a cousin of Arnaud Ente, or his wife's, has moved now to opposite the Rouleau house and on the edge of this En Ormeau vineyard. And it's now called Au Fil du Clos, is its name now. The food's got even better. and is very reasonable. And the wine list is great. It has plenty of Costerie and plenty of Arnaud Ente. And as a sort of a conceit, as an idea, because he is a cousin with the Entes, always the Arnaud Ente wines are more expensive than the Costerie wines. That means you've got to pay quite a lot for Arnaud, but you get very good value Costerie. So I do recommend it. Nice people, good food, and really interesting wines to choose from. So you've got those. If you just taste those first two, if you have the wines, I think, yes.
Yeah.
Taste those first two, and so Clos des Ambres planted in about 1950-51, and the Seve du Clos planted in, let's say, early 1880s, from a relatively rich vintage, and made in large wood and then transferred to tank.
Seve du Clos is heavier.
Yeah. I did a lunchtime tasting about 7 or 8 years back in London with the Entes of various wines, and the 09 was quite weighty. There was one vintage which is less well known, which actually absolutely stole the show, and we're going to have one later on, so I won't say what it is now. I would expect the Clos des Ambres to be fully ready to drink, and the Seve du Clos to be fairly powerful still.
Yeah, I agree with that.
They're both really good.
Both very good. This is not picked too late.
No, never pick too late. On the picking thing, so when somebody else in the village, a chap who has 3 strings to his bow. One, he's a wine producer at the main Buisson Charles, being son-in-law of the late Michel Buisson. Secondly, his real job is to be a school teacher in Dijon. He teaches gymnastics in Dijon, PE. And that's what he's trained to do. And his third job is he writes a sort of blog about the vineyards, the vignerons, and everything else he thinks of in Burgundy. And he's made an absolute diatribe against the early pickers, specifically Arnaud and his brother Benoit, and saying it's sort of the new wave of the flocks for a plague in Burgundy is people who pick too early. Now, I'm sure if Patrick Esser, picked as early as Arnaud or Benoit do, then the grapes really wouldn't be ripe at all, and it wouldn't work. If Arnaud picked as late as Patrick Esser does, then the wines would be top heavy and sort of 14.5 plus alcohol. It is how you do the vineyards, and I've never come across anybody quite as meticulous in the vineyards as Arnaud, his wife Marie Adile, his son Pierre, a couple of full-time workers. They have more than one person per hectare as permanent staff. There's almost nobody else, not even the most fanatic and most expensive of the Cotonouille, who would have quite that intensity of workers for a small holding. So really, every vine is named by its first name and tenderly cared for. So I find I've always found his wines to be ripe enough, I must admit. Any other comments on the two 2009s, or I assume you have the two 2010s alongside, and we can talk about those.
The nose of this 2010, the first one, wow, fantastic.
Could you move the Bluetooth a bit closer, because I'm not picking up most of that.
I was just saying that 2010 Clos des Ambres nose is just beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
It's a really interesting year. We've come to love 2010 in red, and 2010 in white, I think, has sort of come along, benefiting from that reputation. It was a year in which there was this massive storm, the southern end of Chassagne-Montrachet, just before people were going to pick, and it led to a certain amount of botrytis. The weather was fine afterwards, and so it dried on the grapes rather than turning really ugly. but it's given the wines a rather uplifted perfume, which was sometimes a bit too heavy if you're very close to the epicenter of the storm in and around Chassagne. But by the time you get to Meursault, it's just a little inflection, and it's not too much. But normally, aromatically, 2010s are probably more interesting than 2009, whereas I think 2009 has got more body than 2010 in general. But Greg, am I hearing that you would probably prefer the 2010 Clos des Ombres to the 2009?
Yes, I actually prefer. I find the wines that they're fresher as well. Sense to me.
Yeah.
And so you can see there's a bit more so there, sort of a bit of a right vintage.
Yeah. Yep, that doesn't surprise me. I think I'm trying to remember. I may have some 2010 Clos des Ombres stashed away in a secret cellar in Hong Kong. I know I've still got a bit of the 09 Seve du Clos here in Burgundy. I'm not quite sure. I shall have to have a quick look on Cellar Tracker while we're talking to see what I've still got here to try. I've been finishing off my old wines from the previous regime, the sort of 96s and 97s, which do show the fact that it was all quite different in those days. They're still really, really good wines, but they're not at all the style that we've come to know from Arnaud Ente and that really put him on the map and made him famous. So alongside the 2010 Clos des Ombres, you have the Goutte d'Or Premier Cru, which is a very small holding. I mean, nobody has a lot of it. He's got 0.22 of a hectare there. Yeah, so not a vast amount. The vines are reasonably young. They were planted in 1990 or 91, so by the time you get through to 2010, they're beginning to get into a certain amount of maturity. Yes, I do have the 2010 Clos des Ombres sitting for us to share on some future fly past, but I haven't put my local Burgundy cellar onto Cellar Tracker. I can look it up elsewhere. See what I got to play with in future. So the Goutte d'Or should be, I mean, it's not a vineyard that gives massive intensity like a Perrier or a Charmes, but it's a classy beast, and there should be, I'm guessing there might be a touch more acidity showing. Don't know that for sure, but that would be a guess. How's the Goutte d'Or doing?
Do you feel that he makes to a style, or is he trying to express the plot in his, the various parts of Meursault? I feel it's like an on style that is quite prominent across the four tried so far.
He would answer that he is looking to make each vineyard separately. I think inevitably his style does probably show fairly strongly in the wines. Happily, I think it's a wonderful style, so I don't mind that. I'd ask you the question with Costurie, do you think his style is more apparent sometimes than the vineyards? Obviously, the Corson Charlemagne is going to be different, but I think within his Meursault, I would say that the Costurie style might be slightly more influential. I don't know. But clearly the Arnaud style is going to be have quite a lot to say. But I think if you're in his cellar and you taste one wine after the next wine after the next one, you clearly can see appropriate differences from one vineyard to another, even if his unbelievably pure and chiseled style is perhaps leading the way. Don't know if that helps as an answer. But,
So Jasper, I joined a bit late, but I understand, the Clos des Ombres, that's lower down on the slope, and compared to Goutte d'Or, which is, more on the upper slope. Do you think the difference in terroir locations that shows up in the wines, or as we discussed, there is a certain style that sticks to east even though some of these wines are lower down on the slope, but they also show that good minerality across.
Well, we've got a wine we'll look at in a minute, which I think will give you quite a different location in the next flight. You've got the Petit Charrons. It's still not high on the slope, but you are definitely on more of a slope. You're not on the low ground anymore. And I think you'll find something really quite different in that wine. So if you're ready to look at the next flight, then you'll see that in the first wine. We now move away from the 9 and 10 pairing, and here you're going to get 11, 12, 15, 16. So we'll see sort of the further development of what Arnaud was doing. And the wines do become more sophisticated as time goes by. But still already with the 9 and 10, you've absolutely got what he's aiming for. Well, if maybe bring it across on one occasion, I see I've still got some Seve du Clos 03 and 04 and 05, which will be interesting to look at one day.
These are Kong, or are these in your cellar?
These are in my cellar in Burgundy. Now you're allowed to go home again afterwards, which is the big thing. But it's in a bottle here and a bottle there, no more than that. Okay, so do you have the next flight yet or not?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Okay. Well, let me talk about. Let's talk about how the timeline moves on. And already by 2012, Arnaud is looking to put some of the wines. He did an experiment in 09, but wasn't sort of released separately commercially. But alongside his big wooden barrels, if he needed a complement, he's still got some more wine left, and he didn't want to put it into a smaller barrel. He put them into glass jars, not specifically made ones, but they're called bonbons in French, and they're the sort of thing that you might take along to the cooperative in the south of France and get filled up with rosé, like at a petrol station. That sort of glass jerry cans, if you like. And so you're starting to use that in the small crops of 12, 13, 14, which are very small because of hail damage and some bad flowering, this, that, and the other. And also in 2013, he moved away even from the sort of the bigger wooden barrels, and he's gone to what the French call foudre, or the Germans Fuder, or Americans would call puncheons. So they're large sort of oval wooden tanks. I mean, not huge, but you can have them at almost any size. But he started to bring that into the range. So we have the Petit Charrons 2011 is the first of them. And this is, again, a small holding. It's about a third, almost exactly a third of a hectare. So given his minuscule yields, and he does really small yields, that's going to make him, I'm going to say that he would get typically the equivalent of about 4 barrels, 1,200 litres out of that. And straight away, when he started making this vineyard, which I don't think I have the exact date, but it's probably going to be, this would be 2011, will be one of the early vintages of it. Straight away, he started charging more for this than for the Clos des Ambres or his regular Meursault. Previously, he'd had the vineyard, or one of the 2 plots he'd had, but he'd mixed it into his straight Meursault. And when he got another plot, then he pulled it out and made a separate wine. So maybe, I mean, these wines, you could taste them individually rather than as a trio, but be really interested to see what you think of that 2011 Petit Charrons, which I remember from my last time I tasted it in London was almost, I must say, the star of the show. How's it showing?
Stunning. I like it a lot. Yeah, great.
Yeah, I mean, it really was. Nobody was expecting. They were expecting the likes of 9 and 10 more on this previous occasion. And the 11 Petit Charrons, absolutely, if I haven't made a mistake, I'm just looking at my report on it. Absolutely Yes, so it is. That was had from Magnum, and I gave it 97 points and 5 stars. And Arnaud said when talking about it that for him the Petit Charrons reminds him a little bit more of Puligny Montrachet in style than a village Meursault. It's a slightly higher acidity vineyard, so he picks a bit later than his on Ormeau vineyards. But it really was. It was a lunch in which we had, what did we do? We had Goutte, Referts, the Seve du Clos, various vintages, and the star of the lunch was the 2011 Petit Charrons. But I'd be astonished if you find any in captivity now. But
I found Jasper, the Petit Charrons. You can tell why it's so popular, but it's also quite hard to find. And when you find it, it's meaningfully more expensive.
Yeah, I mean, it should always be less than the Petit Clos, you'd think, but yeah, it's I mean, I would argue with him. I mean, much of my life talking to Arnaud when I was sort of practicing wine merchant was both trying to get him to bring his prices down and to get him to give me more wine, which is sort of a non sequitur because it's hard to ask somebody to bring their prices down if you're selling everything through with no problem. In fact, when he really started to put his prices up, it was a big jump. I forget exactly which year, and I said, "Well, Arnaud, we'll go with it, but if we find we can't sell it, then we won't. But we'll go with it." But in the early days, I used to get really quite a big allocation because he divided the market up into, as I say, he's very shy, and he used to. I mean, he still doesn't really like having to talk to importers and the rest of it. So most of his worldwide sales go through one individual who's now started his own negociant wine business, but was a sort of a broker before that. Down in, he's now based in the Beaujolais, but before that was in Lyon. He handles almost all the sales worldwide now, and it therefore it goes to all sorts of different markets in very small volumes. Whereas early on, it used to go to just the US, the UK, but I was allowed to sell it in Asia, and then the French market. So that Petit Charrons, I'm thrilled it's doing what I was hoping it would do, and how my memories of the wine are. And alongside it, you have the Seve du Clos 12 in Magnum, and then 2 slightly younger vintages of the Clos des Ambres 15 and 16, which are probably going to be a little bit outclassed by the 11 and the 12. But I should think that Seve du Clos 12 should be still very, very youthful and incredibly intense, particularly as it's in Magnum.
Jasper, do you remember what happened in 12? Why there are only, 245 Magnums and 75 Magnums? Like
245 bottles and 75. Well, that's probably now that's about all those vines deliver. Back then, they would normally deliver a bit more. In the days before he separated out the Seve du Clos, then he reckoned it was typically 4 barrels, but vines as old as that, they die. And also, I think his yields are lower. But in 2012, it wasn't just the hail, there was bad weather at the flowering, which meant that the crop, it was a particularly small crop, 2012. Apart from the badly frosted years, it's the lowest crop in recent times for the white wines of Burgundy. The reds, I think there was a little bit more because they tend to flower at a slightly different moment. So these are, I was talking about them possibly before you arrived, but these are vines which are thought to date back to around about 1880. So they're 140 years old now, and there are very few of them left, as you would imagine.
Yeah.
But there's no way they're going to rip them out until there's not enough to make even a glass jar. Since nowadays, I didn't get this far. But so with the 2016 frost, and you're going to have the 2016 Clos des Ambres, at that point, he really, really wanted to make each terroir separately, but he didn't have enough even for a barrel, and so pretty much most of the wines went into glass jars. And then he started looking around, and he got somebody to design one of these things, which are now called wine globes, and now lots of people have them. And from 2017, he's pretty much putting everything, apart from bigger volume, less expensive wines like Bourgogne Blanc and the straight Meursault. So he's pretty much putting everything else into the wine globes.
Jasper, the Seve Clos of 2012, I mean, to me, it feels like much richer and there's a concentration of ripeness as well. Is that, compared to the 2011 Le Petit Charrons, is that the age of the vines? Is it the terroir? Is it vintage?
Yes. No, it really, really, really is this tiny product from incredibly ancient vines, because it's consistent every year. And I mean, for me, it's a step above any of his Premier Crus, whether the Goutte d'Or or either of the Puligny Premier Crus he makes. It's one of the most extraordinary wines in all Burgundy, and you know, that's Grand Cru intensity for me, no question. What you don't have is the individual character that you get from one of the Grand Cru vineyards, at Batar, Montrachet, Chevalier, etc. But you do have, for me, the intensity. So hard to see how you could do better than that. But I think the Petit Charrons 11 is probably perfect for drinking now, and the Seve du Clos 12 is probably saying, particularly Magnum, hold on, I've got way more to express later on. I don't know if that's fair. So you've got the two Clos des Ambres, 15, relatively rich year, not a big crop because the vines had suffered from 3 years of being hailed on, and they didn't want to produce a huge amount. They were just sort of looking after themselves, but an okay sized crop. And then 2016, which was massacred by frost in many vineyards. But as I just mentioned, he was able to go ahead and make all his vines. This also was the year in which Pierre, his son, started working with him. There's another son who's not involved, and there's a daughter who's become a lawyer. But for once, the winemaker's going to earn more than the lawyer, I suspect.
The kids haven't screwed it up yet?
One other thing I should mention is that the domain became certified organic from 2014. But whether organic or not, they're just, as I've mentioned, uber meticulous in everything that they do.
Jasper, do they? I noticed the label doesn't say domain on. Is it because they own the vine? They don't own the vines. They own some vines, or is it just a style?
They can call everything domain. A lot of the vineyards are rented or share cropped from other members of the family, either the Thévenot family or one or two other close friends. Yeah. But if you rent it or share crop it, you can still call it domain. No, I think it's probably was just a decision that you know, maybe for the clarity on the label, just to have Arnaud. I will try and I'll look back at my old bottles and see if they had labels, or I'll see. I can tell you how I can do it. I'll just see if we can find any labels for older cellars and then older wines, and then we'll see if
you just noticed it's domain on the back label, but it's
right.
not on.
Yeah, I mean, he's never made a wine which is négociant. Everything has always been domain all the way through, and will continue to be. No, let's have a look. Here's a
16 those.
Let's take a look at an old. I'll look at a 2007 Arnaud Ente. Wow, Cellar Tracker has got even the old vintages. There are hordes of bottles still undrunk. Even back then, it's actually the label showing is a more recent label, even though it's
those collectors.
1999. Let's see if there's a label. No, it's not, even that. No, I think he's only ever said Arnaud Ente. rather than domain on the label. Good. And how are the 15 and the 16 Clos des Ombres showing? I mean, I wanted to try and do it from older to younger, but it's actually a bit of a tough ask for those two to come behind the 11 and the 12. But I'm guessing that they're not too far off drinkability.
Well, they're both great. The nose on the 16 is very attractive.
Because they've come round better than I feared. The 16s, I was really a little bit worried about them at the time. I didn't like them after the frost. I felt a lot of them had this sweet and sour character to do with having sort of 2 generations of grapes. Perhaps not Arnaud's, but there was a little bit of a worry about that. Now they're, from most people, they're showing better than I expected, but I do think that they need to be, they're probably better to drink them quite soon. In general, have not yet really developed any aromatic qualities. I think it's going to be a good vintage. I think there's a lot more to come later on, but they're not yet showing what I think our vintage will do. In the same way that 2009 took quite a lot of time to get where it's going, and now it's mostly in a good place.
So Jasper, is it the nines? Maybe the nines are a bit more age, right? But if you think about the growing season, the 15s were quite close to the 09s.
Yes. Yeah. I think there is, especially in whites, I think there is a direct parallel between how the growing season played out. Both quite hot summers, both quite a decent sized crop, no problem getting the grapes to maturity. People felt that the white wines might be too heavy. It did depend on picking dates, but in most cases, I think the wines have got good balance, and underneath the initial flesh, there is actually a very good structure. But Arnaud's are a little bit heavier than I think he personally would consider the ideal. Okay. Well, time moves on, and we haven't ventured over the road or down the road into the village of Puligny. So we have, by the way, on the map, the Petit Charrons, if you're not sure where the vineyard is, and take a look at the map. So if you stay in the Ormeaux vineyard, if you go straight upwards through the name of Meursault itself, just absolutely on the line upwards, you'll come to Petit Charrons. The bottom of the vineyard is almost flat, but very quickly it goes quite steeply uphill towards Rougeot, which deserves to be better known, but it doesn't have somebody making the wine under its own label that quite does the job. I'm not sure if Costerie still make it under their own label, whether it gets blended, but Chevalier and Tesson, it's a really good band of vineyards. And the top of Petit Charrons is up there in the same class. Anyway, now we are heading south. We're going to Puligny-Montrachet. 2 vineyards, one of which is quite recent. The Changan, you're going to have 2017. The first vintage of that was 2014, when they were able to get hold of the small holding of Changan. It's about 1/4 of a hectare, 0.2448. And the other is Referts, but which he's had from the start, but most of it is currently pulled out. So the vintages you've got 2013 and 2015, they still had these sort of older vines, but they weren't in tip-top condition. Now he's gone on making it because he's got an additional parcel, but there's only a very small amount, 0.13, that's being made at the moment, but there's more to come, another 0.24 to come, which have been replanted in 2021. So 13, a difficult year, a late harvest. Most people were picking at the end of September into October. Arnaud would have started a little bit earlier. He would have started around about the autumn equinox, I would guess, around sort of 20th, 21st of September. And then the 2015, which you've already visited with Clos des Ombres. And 15 was early, but not stupidly early. Like 09, it was sort of second week of September. And then you have the 2017 Changan in Magnum, so that should be amazingly intense. course, we've grown to love 2017 as a vintage. Some of them are going a little bit quiet now, sort of going into a quiet spot, but it doesn't make me rate the vintage down. It's just I think they're not quite so ready. Anyway, that's an indication of what we got to play with. So typically less density and more aromatics out of these vineyards would be how I would characterize them. How are we doing? So the 13 I would expect to be fully ready, the 15 not, and then the 17 in Magnum also not, but should have enough to show.
I see why the 13 is a more difficult white finish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a favorite of mine by any means.
Completely rounder. But what is notable is we've moved away from Meursault. Clearly,
Yes.
This is a totally different village.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean I think that's going to continue through the other two wines. I think all three really very different.
I like the or I like the 17. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'll look see if I can find my notes. I like the Referts 15 when we tasted it during Bergfest in September 2018, but it wasn't an absolute winner. It was probably a little bit too backward at that point. But
The Referts, like it's a lot of muscle behind it. It feels as well. So, it's pretty
yeah, well, Referts is next door to Meursault Charmes, and almost well, a significant number of the producers of Referts actually operate out of Meursault rather than out of Puligny. So it is probably the most Meursault-like of vineyards, but even so, it's got quite a difference. It's mostly on flatter land with quite a lot of clay. An exception would be Jacques Carrion's holding a Referts, which seems to have much more stones, and weirdly enough is the most mineral of his pre-Puligny Premier Crus. But otherwise, that's not typical. Now, when did I taste? Tasting the 2017 Changin. Oh yes, I gave it 5 stars and 95 points, and said from quarter of a hectare, as I already said, it's next to La Truffière because Changin is a big vineyard, and it starts right on the edge of Saint-Aubin, right alongside the Meursault de Chien vineyard. And if you're there, it is much more like that. But Arnaud's holding is next to the Truffière vineyard, so close to the village of the hamlet of Blenny, where you tend to get wines with slightly more substance. And actually, nothing had happened in that vineyard. It was fallow ground until replanted in 1956 for the first time since Phylloxera. So the vine's got a decent bit of age on them now. And I thought it was quite discreet to begin with, and then really opened out absolutely beautifully with a very, very long finish. So I preferred the Changin 17 narrowly over the Referts 17, but actually that year I liked the Goutte d'Or even more, which I don't always. And but I loved all these 17s.
So do you think his style is better suited to the Meursault wines or the Puligny wines?
If you examined, if you think about what his style is, intellectually, you would expect it to be more with Puligny. When I taste them, I'm more with Meursault.
Why is that, Jasper?
I don't know. I can't explain it. Unless it's because I happen to prefer Meursault to Puligny as a village anyway. Or because the Petit Charrons turns out to be an exceptional site, and obviously the Seve du Clos is such a knockout. I'll go back across a number of years and see whether I tend to give the Pulignys or the Goutte d'Or, because they would be more on a par with each other, whether I give them the higher ratings. I utterly adore his straight Bourgogne Blanc, which comes mostly from Meursault, not entirely, but not actually from below the village of Meursault, not within the appellation of Meursault. But it's just a domain that whenever I go, I get so excited tasting the wines. And he's, the thing is, one of the reasons he's shy, and but he doesn't like responding to questions too much about how he's making them technically, because he doesn't want his technique to become the story. And though he's obviously happy that his wines are loved and he gets very good price for them, he doesn't want to join the world of the cult. I mean, it doesn't give him a personal excitement. He likes to be out there in the vineyards with his wife and son and a couple of workers, and that's what really makes him function. Now, you would have asked him a question had he been here, which would have been, what other vineyard would you really, really like to work with? So I forgot to ask him that question when I saw him. And I'd love to see him with the Meursault Boucher, because that's a vineyard where you have to pick early to get good results. I'd love to see him with the finesse of Geneviève, but my guess is he would probably say Perrier, Meursault Perrier. And I think he'd probably stay in Meursault. I'm only guessing, as I say, I didn't ask him. But in response to Michael's universal question, whenever we have these events, that's the answer I'm going to give on his behalf. So that. I need to leave you. I've got to catch a train, to catch a plane, to get to London for some tastings the next 2 days. And the company of Mr. Christophe Roumier, being a vertical of his amoureuses, which we'll look forward to and we'll report back on. It's not often I can make you guys jealous when I see what you're tasting. It's normally the other way around. If you've got a final question on Arnaud Ente, then do please ask. Otherwise, I will leave you to enjoy the rest of the bottles and Magnums with a bit more food and with your own company. So, anything else to ask? Or
Jasper, can you talk a little bit about the reds that he's making?
yeah, in fact, he's handed over the making of the reds to his son Pierre, because he's never felt that he's sort of got fully on board with them. There was a Passe du Grain which has been pulled out. The Passe du Grain and the Aligoté get pulled out, and they've actually built themselves a new cuvery starting from, I think, the 2021 vintage. They made the wines there. But he does have some Bourgogne Rouge, confusingly, in a vineyard called Les Champons, but it's nothing to do with Volnay Champons. And he has the Volnay Centenot, which is not, again, within Goutte. I think they were planted in around 1991. And he's played around with doing whole bunch and now not again. They were difficult in the early years when I had to buy them along with the whites, and I really, really struggled to sell them. And they could, the Bourgogne Grand Ordinaire, as it was called, or Bourgogne Passe du Grain. No, it was Bourgogne Grand Ordinaire, was a really difficult sell because it'd often be very reductive. But since then, the Pinot Noir is absolutely what it says on the tin. Is a good wine. I don't think it has the greatness that you can associate with his reds. With his whites. But nonetheless, they've got to a position in which the reds are well worth buying if the price hasn't got to sort of crazy secondary market prices. I'm just having a look to see what he's done, and he's now. So, for example, the let's have a look and see my notes on the 2021 reds, if I can find them. So he's now actually making the reds in the wine globes as well. He kicked them out after the 2018, I think, was the last vintage. They were in small barrels. They then went into the oval foudre, and he's now got rid of those too. And so they're now only in the wine globes. And the Volnay Centenot, what can I say about that? Yes, they become just a little bit more velvety rather than having slightly rough tannins that they used to have. So that's definitely well worth looking at. And even if I don't think, well, with only 2 vineyards in any case, that they're going to achieve the fame of the whites. But I think you'll agree with me that the whites have merited their fame.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, I think we're back this time next week, are we not? And indeed the week after. But again, with rather shy vignerons who I haven't managed to persuade to come to the table. And then in December, we have Pierre Durocher, and that will be at his winery. And that promises to be really exciting as well. So there's a few to look forward to. Enjoy the rest of this evening, and I will see you next time.